The Western Conference is slightly different than it's been for the better part of this decade. Normally, the West is known as the almighty powerhouse, containing at least 3 teams that could realistically come out of the conference and win the championship. Although the West is still the better conference, with Kevin Durant going to the Warriors and a few teams just getting worse in general, this is definitely the most top-heavy the conference has been in quite some time. But even with that fact, the Western Conference playoffs are still looking to be wildly entertaining, and today I'm here to show you guys my bracket for how I expect it all to play out. What's up, NBA fans? Dom2K on the mic, and if I had it my way, I would have done both the East and the West in one video, but in an extremely rare turn of events, the East is actually the conference coming down to the last day. Meanwhile, the West has now been decided for probably about 2 days at the time of this recording. But in any event, that's probably a good thing because it gives me more time to go a bit more in depth on each matchup. So without further ado, let's take a look at how it might all go down. For the 1-8 series, we've got a rematch of last year's semifinals with the Warriors and Blazers. Portland fell a bit short of expectations after their mini postseason run last season and just barely edged out Denver for the 8th spot. Although this series is going to feature 2 of the most exciting point guards in Curry and Lillard, I fully expect this to be a relatively quick and painless outing for the Blazers because, truth be told, this just is not a good matchup for them. Golden State won all 4 regular season matchups by an average of 19.5 points, including a 45-point rout in the second meeting. Not only are the Blazers a bad defensive team, they simply lack anything close to enough firepower to stay with the roster that has Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, and Klay Thompson on it. Lillard and McCollum, those are great scorers, and the addition of Nurkic, that really helps them as well, but I don't feel so bad about not giving them a chance in this series because this is basically the all-star team versus a team that still has some years of development and personnel additions to go. At the beginning of this season, Lillard said the Warriors weren't the same team without Bogut. Yeah, he was right, they're actually a lot scarier come playoff time with Durant. Warriors in 4. For the 2-7 matchup, we've got the series that seems to happen every single year in the Spurs and Grizzlies, and at this point, a year in the playoffs really wouldn't feel right if they didn't play each other. Since the year 2011, the two have met on 3 separate occasions in the playoffs, and in the first one, Memphis pulled off a huge upset, knocking off San Antonio in 6 games, but the Spurs have since avenged that by sweeping them in the next 2 playoffs. This year, the two split their 2 regular season games, and I actually think this is going to be one of the more interesting first round matchups. Remember, the Grizzlies last year, they were decimated by injuries in the playoffs, so they didn't stand much of a chance. This time around, Memphis is back to their regular grit and grind style. They're relatively healthy with the exception of Parsons, who's never healthy, and as usual, they're one of the league's premier defensive teams. Meanwhile, they're almost dead last in offense, which has basically been the one thing standing between them and a championship over the past seasons. On the other side, the Spurs are as usual one of the league's powerhouses, and this year with an improved Kawhi Leonard on top of Gasol, who's been solid, they're poised to make a deep run, and I don't think the Grizzlies are going to stop that in the first round. It's definitely worth the mention here that back when Memphis beat San Antonio by 15 points in February, Kawhi didn't play, so if he had of, perhaps this season series would have been 3-1 with the advantage to the Spurs. I think this is going to be a hard-fought series full of defense, but I expect the Spurs' execution combined with the Grizzlies' tough time scoring to put them over the top in no more than 6 games. The 3-6 matchup for the West is probably at least the second most anticipated matchup for the playoffs. In a beautiful twist of fate, the 2 players doing things we haven't seen in decades fell into place to meet in just the first round. Not only that, but it's still being hotly debated over which one of these guys is MVP. Sadly, we're not going to find out who actually won until after the season, when I don't think a lot of people are going to care anymore. Anyways, Mr. Triple Double versus Mr. Triple Double Jr., I guess, they're going to face off and we're going to get to see history clash like never before. It's been a blessing to get to see Westbrook throughout this season. For those of you who missed Iverson, you should feel lucky Westbrook came along because he's another one of those rare players that just leaves absolutely everything on the floor night in and night out. Somehow he never gets tired, and it's pushed him to average a triple-double and lead the Thunder to nearly 50 wins even though they lost an MVP caliber player over the summer. Meanwhile, James Harden's numbers, they're not really that much worse than Westbrook's. However, his team did pass the 50-win mark, and that's impressive too considering people wondered if they were even a playoff team coming into the season. Through this season series, the Rockets took 3 of the 4 matchups, and 3 of the 4 games were decided by 3 points or less. If that's any indication, this is going to be a ridiculous first round matchup, but I think reality can be a terrible thing sometimes, and the reality of this series is that if it goes as it should, the Rockets are going to be sending Westbrook home early. Westbrook has been defying logic the entire season. One of my favorite things to look at is the fact that he's playing with an outdated team. In 2017, any successful team should be able to shoot the 3-ball, yet the Thunder ranked 29th in that category. Even with that, somehow Westbrook has been able to keep this team competitive every night. The problem here though is that the Rockets are legit polar opposites. Not only do they have an MVP candidate as well, but he's surrounded by a team that actually fits him and this era perfectly. They're the second best offensive team in the league and they rank first in 3-pointers made. With such a potent offensive attack led by the guy who may still win MVP, the Thunder would simply have to defy logic to beat them in a 7-game series. However, Westbrook has been defying logic this entire year, so don't be surprised. So although we're about to get a series for the ages, I hope everyone can appreciate, I've got the Rockets taking them out in 6. I would have said 5, but I don't see Westbrook letting them go out without a great fight. And finally, that leaves us with the 4-5 matchup featuring the Clippers and Utah. Home court advantage isn't quite figured out in this series yet at the time of this recording, but we know the series is going down either way. The Jazz are returning from a 4-year playoff absence led by some of the more underrated players in the league such as Gordon Hayward and Rudy Gobert. I assume people don't know much about them because they aren't on TV a whole lot, so let me break down the basics. Rudy Gobert has improved tremendously, averaging a double-double, nearly 3 blocks a game, and he's had his name tossed around for Defensive Player of the Year. Gordon Hayward is putting up numbers almost identical to Paul George's, and you don't really hear about it because he's in Utah, he might not be as exciting, but just know that if he does decide to go somewhere this summer during free agency, you'd love to have him on your team. And meanwhile, we have the Clippers who we're hoping that Chris Paul and the crew can finally put together something decent in the playoffs and they can start by taking care of business with Utah. I have to point out that the Clippers are going to be a 4th or 5th seed, but all things considered, the year was a success for them. They lost both Chris Paul and Blake Griffin for a big portion of the year and still ended up with 50 wins. That's an underrated achievement, so don't look at them as a conventional 5th seed if it winds up that way, cause they're definitely the real 3rd seed in the West this year. In 4 regular season matchups with the Jazz, the Clippers basically wiped the floor with them winning 3 of the games by double digits. While it's true in one of the Clippers wins that the Jazz were missing Gordon Hayward, in another one of the Clippers wins they were missing Chris Paul, so yeah, that kinda evens out. Look, I get the excitement behind a young team like the Jazz, and this is probably going to be a good series. I would say we're going to see some good basketball in it, but if the Clippers just lock down and take care of business, this should really be over in 5. They have the more mature roster, the more talented roster, and definitely more playoff experience. However, the Clippers disappointing in the playoffs isn't anything new, so if this takes any longer than it should or they blow it all together, I'll happily admit I was wrong. This brings us to the second round, which surprisingly gets a bit less complicated because, as I said before, the West is pretty top heavy this year. In the second round, we get that long awaited playoff matchup between the Clippers and Warriors. You know, the matchup that was a rivalry a couple of years ago? Well, there's only one problem. Nobody cares anymore. I had a fan remind me that the Clippers and Warriors was once considered the NBA's only true rivalry back in 2014. The big problem there is that the Warriors left them in the dust long before adding Kevin Durant. 2015 was the Clippers' golden chance to prove they were still on par with Golden State, and that's when they blew the 3-1 lead to the Rockets that would have put them in the conference finals. A shame too, cause that's when they were playing their best basketball. Last season, that matchup was supposed to happen in the second round, but the entire roster fell apart with injuries against the Blazers. And now the Warriors have Kevin Durant and are just an awful matchup for the Clippers. One of the biggest issues is that they don't have that ball handling scorer they need to match someone like Kevin Durant. This small forward position has been voided at almost the entire time they've been relevant. Oh, and did you guys want a fun fact? Of course you did. The Warriors have a 10-game win streak currently going on against the Clippers. The Clippers haven't beaten them one time since Christmas Day of 2014. In this season alone, the Warriors beat them in 4 games by a combined 86 points. I could keep going on forever, but at this point I kind of feel like I'm just picking on the Clippers, and I swear I'm not. It's just that Golden State is in another class with this matchup. Warriors in 4. That leaves us with the bottom half of the bracket where the Spurs and Rockets are going to battle for Texas. The interesting thing here is that it's almost a reflex to pick the Spurs in most playoff series. However, I am a little wary of that even when it looks like they should win, because last year against the Thunder, myself and many others did not give OKC a chance against them. This year, being that the Rockets at their core are still just one superstar player surrounded by great role players, I'm also tempted to say the Spurs would steamroll them in the series. However, that's simply not how I really feel. Although the Spurs have taken 3 or 4 regular season matchups, they were extremely narrow wins. 3 of those 4 wins were only decided by 2 points. I'm so hesitant with the Spurs in the playoffs because although they contend every year, they still have a habit of dragging out series that shouldn't take them that long, or flat out losing the series you didn't think they could lose. Case in point 2011, 2014, 2015, and last season. However, I think the big difference here is going to be that the Spurs execute at a high level on both ends, meanwhile the Rockets do most of the damage on the offensive end. Yes, it's true that they can light it up, and they even match up with the Spurs pretty well, but they're still a less than stellar defensive team. Along with the Spurs' execution on both sides of the ball, they have more versatile weapons that'll do them well in a series like this. So while Harden is going to be carrying a lot of the load with the ball, the Spurs are going to be able to attack with both Kawhi and Aldridge, meanwhile still having solid, versatile contributions from players like Ginobili, Parker, and even Gasol. Long story short, they're a deeper and more versatile team, which should give them the edge. But one thing I did want to throw out there is that Harden performs extremely well against the Spurs. Through the 4 regular season matchups, he averaged 29.7 points, 9 rebounds, and 11.7 assists a game against them. He did all this on 47% field goal shooting, so if anything, their best player goes off every time they play the Spurs. So this is not going to be an easy series. The Rockets proved in all 4 matchups that they can hang with them, and if a few more things had gone their way, they might have won more than one game. So I'd pick the Spurs to go in 7 here, which will finally give us our long-awaited playoff matchup of the Spurs and Warriors in the conference finals. 4 years ago in 2013, before I'd even started college, I remember watching the Warriors give the Spurs a run for their money. At the time, the NBA had basically been controlled by powerhouse teams who had the star power to make the finals, and Curry, Thompson, nor Green had yet to show what they are today. Even with that, Curry was still obviously an amazing talent, and I remember when that series was tied 2-2, I was in disbelief of what might happen because the Warriors had pretty much come out of nowhere at that time, and I couldn't imagine them in the finals being so young and just coming out of nowhere. It was just kind of mind-boggling to see what they were doing. I bring that up just because it's amazing to see how fast they turned a mini postseason run into 3 seasons of complete dominance, and for about 3 years, we've waited to see these two clash in the playoffs at full strength. And if there's no injuries in the postseason and the Spurs don't get upset in the earlier rounds, there's a pretty high probability we'll finally see it, but not under the circumstances we would have liked. See, the Spurs are an amazing team as usual, 60 plus wins, an ever-evolving superstar with a talented supporting cast, and in any other year, I'd call them the clear favorites to win the championship. However, as we all know, the Warriors almost single-handedly ruined parity by signing Kevin Durant to a brand of basketball that was already unstoppable to begin with. A team that plays stellar defense and explosive offense is unbeatable by most standards, and that's exactly what we've got in a fully healthy Warriors team. When either Curry, Thompson, Durant, or any combination of those 3 heat up, they're nearly impossible to beat, and that's why they've ended up with a few 40-point wins this year. I'll make it very clear where I stand with this. I truly believe that the only chance the Spurs stand in this series is if the Warriors can't find their chemistry throughout the playoffs with the addition of KD back into the lineup, and to be honest, that's not really likely. I noticed this narrative while Kevin Durant was injured where people started to say that the Warriors were better without him, and I thought that was pretty crazy. It's like people suddenly forgot the ridiculous margin the Warriors were winning by all season when they had KD on the floor, or the straight up video game like basketball they were playing at sometimes. I see what tricked people though. Without Kevin Durant on the floor, they didn't have another ball handling scorer to take away from Curry. Therefore, Curry was able to get off like he was doing last season, and that's what caused this whole narrative. Look, Curry is an overall more exciting player when he's not sharing shots with KD, but with this specific roster that traded its bench for Kevin Durant, when it comes down to the playoffs specifically, not the regular season, they're going to need him out there to go deep in the playoffs. While it's true the Warriors got the Spurs without Kevin Durant a few weeks ago, that does not mean they don't need him in a series with them. The playoffs are totally different. But I think the best way I could put this would be in the words of Jeff Van Gundy. During the broadcast of the last Spurs-Warriors meeting, he said something along the lines of, the NBA keeps trying to push this narrative that there's a question of who the best team is or there's some kind of parity in the league, and there's really not. When the Warriors are healthy, they are far and wide the best team. And ultimately, I think that's what's going to propel them past the Spurs in the conference finals. It's not that the Spurs aren't an amazing team, and it's not even that they can't give the Warriors trouble. It's just that the Warriors broke so many rules by creating this super team, and nothing short of injuries or huge chemistry problems are going to change that. Oh, and being that they've got a couple of rounds of prep before the conference finals, I don't see chemistry being a problem, especially since they found it before Kevin Durant was hurt. But don't let that make you think this isn't going to be a close series. The Spurs have already shown that they match up pretty well with the Warriors, and even though McGee has been solid for the Warriors, the inside is still the Spurs' biggest advantage, being that they've got a skilled 7-footer in Gasol and then LaMarcus Aldridge. But at the end of the day, Kawhi Leonard can only guard one person at a time, and the Warriors have 3 lethal weapons. I say Golden State advances to the NBA Finals in 6. So this bracket probably didn't turn out any differently than you expected. As I stated at the beginning, the West is very top heavy with very little chance of upset. If anything, the Rockets may prevail and knock off the Spurs like OKC did last year, but I think the Spurs are still the safer bet in that series. I'll admit that it's a bit of a buzzkill where the winner of the West seems so obvious because it really hasn't been like this in past years. Even when the Lakers were coming out every year up to 2010, those were pretty gruesome battles leading up to it, and that element it's kinda missing this year. Even with that, just remember that this is the playoffs and anything could happen. If you would have put a bet on the Cavaliers after Game 4 last year, you would have looked like a fool, but there's many factors in any postseason. So if you come back to this video in a couple of months and I'm completely wrong, just remember, I can't see into the future any further than you can. I'm just basing my predictions off of everything I've seen this season. That being said, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you're as excited for the NBA playoffs as I am, and I want you guys to put your thought in the comment section. You don't have to build an entire bracket, but you can tell me who you think is coming out of the West. If you disagree with me on some series, definitely go ahead and put why and who you have winning, and I'm gonna read through all of those because I love the playoffs as much as anybody. So hope you enjoyed the video. Like, comment, and subscribe if you did, and I'll see you guys on the Eastern Conference predictions video next time.